What's going on, Center City Church?
I want to hear your little beep boop beep boop beep
boop. You know, I wanted to do it yesterday when we came out on stage, but I just felt like that would be in bad taste after a worship song. It ended really slowly, so it's like, let's hype this up for a minute. But John Gonzalez was already going for it, so
I like you already know, but I did almost fall out of the chair when I watched last week's podcast, and you did that. So thanks for that.
Well, you can thank Polly D and the Jersey Shore team.
I've never seen Jersey Shore.
So we'll change that, don't worry.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, welcome to You Already Know. And today we got the infamous Ashley Kramer back in the saddle again.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. And we thought that Emma did such a good job that we just, I don't know, she was in the back like, Emma, you want to do the podcast again? She said yes.
Here she is.
And here she is doing the podcast again.
Yeah.
Which I'm actually really excited about, because one of my favorite things that we do every week is we meet and talk through whatever the scripture is that the sermon's going to be on. And I really enjoy those conversations a lot. So I feel like this is kind of inviting the rest of the church into that, because we did all talk about Sarah and Hagar a lot last week. And now we get to do that on camera. Yay.
Yay.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take the reins here and ask the questions, because I've got the mic closest to my mouth.
If you watched last week's podcast, you know why we need you to do that.
My questions were great.
Your questions were great, but she does a really good job with the reins. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, just keeps it moving.
I felt like
I thought that last week's was great.
I did too.
People are going to see a new side of our relationship.
This is why you're back. If it wasn't great, you would be sitting in the back room right now.
Trust me, because I've tried to steer it sometimes, and it's horrible. It's car
Oh,
wreckage.
I know, I watched.
Well, I kind of want to do something a little bit different, which is great because your message was a little bit different. But I really want to take a minute and look at the two women in the story. So we've got Sarai, also known as Sarah, and then we've got...
Okay, time out, because I asked this question. Is it Sarai or is it Sarah?
In this story, it's Sarai.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when people know the story of Abraham and Sarah, I think
Sarah.
it's helpful for you to know that it's the same person.
I'm sorry.
Did her name ever switch?
Yes, her name does switch.
It does switch.
Soon.
Like Abrams does.
Spoiler alert.
I was just making sure I had it correct.
Yeah, so that's why. It's the same person.
Yes.
But in this story, her name is still Sarai, and his name is Abram, not Abraham yet. But because that's confusing, and often we hear about Abraham and Sarah first, I just wanted people to know it's the same people.
I mean, and technically that's next week, but we'll
Right.
get there.
I know, that's why I said spoiler alert. So I just remember when we were talking, Emma, you were very drawn to Sarai in the story. And I wondered if you would just share a little bit what made you feel connected to her and kind of able to see what was going on with her in this particular story.
Yeah, I think Sarai or Sarah is super relatable because I think she's superhuman. And the fact that, not like superhuman like Superman, but she's just very fleshy. And the fact that here's a promise that was given to her. Here's 10 years later. I can only imagine what that would feel like. And I mean, I know exactly what that feels like. I know what it's like to wait. I know what it's like to wait for what feels like forever, to watch everybody get what you want, to feel like you're the reason, maybe you're the problem that you're not getting this thing, and feeling like, well, I'm going to solve it. I'm going to make it better. I'm going to do this. I don't think she was trying to be malicious in this. I think she was just, our flesh sometimes runs ahead of us. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves in like these places of, now I'm pointing blame, and now I'm pointing fingers because now I feel ashamed. But I think in any season of my life I could point to and tell you where I've waited, and I don't know if I've always been as patient as I should be. I think even in the soft season of us in the process of home buying, if you've bought a house in Charlotte, congratulations, you were patient. I'm not. But I think through that, this has been a 1.5 year journey. And so many times I remember feeling like we should just give up. Like, we should just stop this. Like, is this what God wants for us? Is this not? And just in having to wrestle with that and just waiting and just calming and waiting till the right thing at the right time. Because the thing is, God's more excited about our futures than we are. And I think when I learned that truth, I was okay to wait. But I don't think it's until we learn that God's excited about our future and is excited about the plans he has for us that we really are okay with waiting.
Yeah, I think that's great. I have just kind of been thinking through the scenario of what if Abram and Sarai were here now, kind of living in our culture, and I were walking with them through this season of, we think we've heard this promise from the Lord, but nothing's happening. How would I advise them? Should they choose to ask me for advice? And I'm just curious what you guys think, because unfortunately, I'd love to be like, I would tell them to wait and hold out, but I might actually say, well, let's think creatively. And I might actually go down that same thought pattern that they go through. Well, maybe we're supposed to help God out with this promise, or maybe we haven't tried all the resources available to us. What do you think, Jon, that you would say in that situation?
I believe in a lot of those scenarios of counseling, for lack of a better term, and just so everybody
Not for me.
knows. Yeah, like
Clearly.
we are big believers in the kind of role of counselors in people's lives, and it's not a role that we play. So it's not that we can't help coach and we can't help mentor and we can't have good conversation, steer people to scripture, like all that stuff's within our scope. But when it comes to like counseling people who are dealing with some issues, and we're quick to point people to counselors. But as it pertains to like conversation and just people in general, one of the things that I always try to do is point people to the what, not necessarily the how. So what was the promise? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that. Let's figure out what about the nuance of the promise. Because I'm a firm believer that God often will give you a thing and you're waiting on the next step, but there's some things that still need to be done. And you know what they are, you're just kind of hesitating. So I tend to just really kind of step back into the fullness of the promise. What's the promise? What did he say? And try to keep that at the forefront of the conversation. Because what I don't want to do, to your point earlier, is start suggesting, because it's just as dangerous for me to take that promise in their hands. And I don't want to do that either.
Yeah, and one thing I did notice, of course, we don't know everything that happened outside of the actual words that we get in Scripture, but nowhere in the story do you see Abram or Sarai go to the Lord. Say, is this something that you're directing us to do? Is this something that is how you're choosing to fulfill the promise? And I do believe that when we're genuinely trying to seek after him, and we go to him with something that's a bad idea, asking if it's from him, he usually figures out a way to tell us no.
Yeah. Well, and I will tell you, to their defense, every time they went to the Lord, he just kept reminding them of the promise.
Which, I mean, that's good to hear.
It's great to hear, but I'm just...
You didn't make it up that last time I told you. Hear it again.
It is again. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I do want to move on to Hagar a little bit, because I think there's a lot of connection here. It's funny, when we first started talking about this, I think I was the one who was like, I think this is two different messages. But really, there's a lot of redemption for Sarah and Abram in Hagar's story as well. But I just kind of wanted to ask, and if you're not ready, because I didn't prepare either of you for this, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt like your only option was running away? And what was your prayer life like, or your encounter with God like in that situation? To keep it surface level.
Yeah, no. No, thanks for the lack of preparation on that.
That's how this works.
Has been. I'm trying to just figure out, in what context? Just any situation where I've
Yeah. I mean, I'll go first since I asked it. But I just remember a time when I had come home from serving in Tanzania for a year and gone through some fairly traumatic experiences there, and didn't feel like anyone understood me when I got home. And so kind of my nature, I didn't physically run away, but I stayed in my room and watched the TV show Bones all the time. I don't even remember this. My roommates from the time have just told me that that's all I did. They'd be like, hey, do you want to eat dinner? No, I'm going to stay up here and watch Bones. And it took me getting through the show and being like, what do I do now? Because I don't have any more episodes to watch, to really get real with the Lord and just say, I'm not okay. I don't know where to go. I feel like you took me this far and now I'm messed up. And what am I supposed to do about that? And he really met me in that, not just through my prayer life. I did really feel his presence in that season, but also bringing along some people who I could trust with what was going on. Once I finally kind of told them that I was a little bit screwed up at the time, got some counseling, because that's always helpful. But that's just kind of what comes to mind for me, is that he was really faithful to meet me, even though I wasn't necessarily really seeking him. I was just trying to kind of be away from everything and numb what I was dealing with.
Yeah, for me, often when I talk about our journey with infertility, I tend to shy away from my experience because it was just, I don't know, I guess I do that in life, period. I shy away from my experience and try to talk about the experience of the people around me. And it was so just fundamental to Jess and walking through it. But yet in my own personal journey, I do remember a season where I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't figure out how to solve what I was feeling. I couldn't figure out how to solve what she was feeling. And as a husband, that put a different, it wasn't just me carrying my own way of, the stuff, not having a boy to throw a football with, and not having someone to pass my name down to, but then also not being able to look at my wife and give her a good answer for why there was nothing. And there was a place where, and if you've heard my story, you've heard it before, but where Jess and I were sitting in the car and we received more bad news that this round of vitro wasn't going to work. And it's funny how the Lord used Jess, because it was her, once we hung the phone up and I'm trying to gather the words of what I'm going to say, it was her who said, I don't know what he's doing, but I know he's here. And it's so funny because you asked him that question. That would have been a really good sermon illustration, but I didn't use it. And yet it ties into this Hagar, I don't know what he's doing, but I know he hears me. I know he sees me. And I guess that would be one of my moments.
Yeah, I love it.
I think for me, the situation that comes to mind, I think there's a few. I did some silly stuff in high school and college, but
I didn't.
But I think after graduating from Southeastern and transitioning out, I found myself in a season where I wasn't really in ministry. I graduated with a degree, but I wasn't quite using it. I kind of had a passion here. I kind of had a passion there, but I didn't really know how the Lord was going to be like enwrapping and using it all, and gave my time to something and it didn't really work out, and just kind of being left to be like, Lord, I feel like, am I not hearing something correctly? Like, are we not doing this right? Like, I felt like for me, I'm a big rhythm person. So for me, I was like, my rhythms are in check. Like, I'm here with you. Like, I really felt like I think that's when it's really tough, when it's like, I can't really point to any of my fruits as bad. Yeah. Like, why am I still here? I think if we're not careful, we'll try to think of it as punishment. We'll try to look for something.
And just to give you a little, just to add, it's not just us. There's good, well-intended people who will say things like, well, maybe God's not giving that to you because you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was a lot of that we had to fight through. And they were all well-intended, out of love and concern, and yet, to some degree out of ignorance. And it wasn't that I didn't have to look at myself and figure out what I was doing, but just because you're in a waiting season doesn't mean it's because of your past mistakes.
Exactly. And I think, I'm sure you two watched me walk through this season of just feeling like, did I do something wrong? Like, I thought this was it. I thought I was walking into the promised land. Like, I felt like it was there. And then for it to not work out, I remember feeling hopeless and sad and a lot of tears. But looking back on that now, I almost feel like that was the best thing that could ever happen to me. And I think that is because that is one of the truest seasons that I really did wait, that I really didn't go out. The whole thing, I just remember the Lord being like, don't go out and make it happen for yourself, because I am very much like Sarai. I will go out and make it happen for myself. And so I think that's the season that comes to my mind where I can genuinely look back now and be like, that was probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
Well, so I feel like what we see in all of these characters is this desperation, right? Like, they're just responding a little bit differently to it. Like, Sarai is desperately trying to manipulate the situation to meet the promise. Hagar is desperately trying to get out of a bad situation. And she has this encounter with the Lord, and I love it. But one of the things, I just feel like there may be someone watching who totally gets that desperation, but we tend to, God can do whatever, but we tend to not have encounters with aliens. We don't have encounters with aliens or angels. Sorry, it's been a couple weeks. But we don't have angels meeting us in that desert place that we physically see and physically hear this promise often, what would you say to people who say, yes, I'm desperate, I need to know that the Lord sees me and hears me?
Yeah, so just kind of two things right off the bat. I know specifically in the culture we live in today, that everything is about experience, but for all intents and purposes, the message you need to hear has already been spoken. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage anyone in a desperate season to return to the message of the word, right? That there's a promise for you. I don't have to know you. I don't have to know what you're going through. I don't need to know what your season looks like. I don't know what your waiting looks like, but I do know that there's a message already for you. And I value this word so much because of the cost that it took to get here in this moment, and that it's alive and living to the point that a story like Hagar's and Sarai's can minister to us thousands of years later, can minister to you thousands of years later. So you don't have to wait for a word from an angel by the backside of a wilderness spring.
Or an alien.
Or an alien.
But I would also tell you to not overestimate the power of the people around you and how God can use. There's been oftentimes in my life that the angel, didn't necessarily come into the room with wings and lights and smoke, although not sure that that's how it happened with Hagar either. But that the Lord does speak through people, like normal people who you know, people who you actually probably wouldn't expect it. Recently, I had a conversation with somebody who spoke confirmation to what the Lord was saying. So I never expect God to put my mail in someone else's mailbox. That's just a principle that my youth pastor instilled in me, and it sounds probably pretty youth pastory. But to this day, I'm not expecting God to speak a new word from somebody. I expect a lot of times God to use people to confirm what he's already saying to me. And I was in a season where I was asking a couple questions, and someone randomly had a conversation with, and the way they phrased a statement about, it was specifically about my call and how I needed to shake everything else off. The way that they phrased it, they had no idea the impact that those words had. The moment he said it, I had to go back to my car, pull out my journal. I was shook. And you never know how God can use somebody in community.
Yeah, I would even expand further on that. I think community, number one, I wonder if Sarah and Abraham went to a friend, went to wise counsel, went to a sibling, a brother, and said, hey, we think we're going to do this. Can you just check us for a second?
Is this what would have happened if they had a small group?
This is exactly. Well, no, I was even going to say that. I think all of the seasons of my life where I have struggled and where I have said, is this what you're doing, Lord? The seasons that hurt the most for the seasons, because in that it's really easy to isolate. Hagar ran away. It's super easy to be by ourselves, but I think it's a lot easier to do this when you have people around you saying, no, the promise is on the other side. For people telling me their testimonies of what happened to them, testimonies are powerful. I just think community is the key here, because situations like what you said or not said, and someone's just there to sit with you through it all, I think also makes the difference.
I promise I didn't mean to set out doing a groups plug, but centercity.church/groups, because this is the time, and I really didn't set out to do that. But if you're listening and you don't have people walking with you, is a perfect time to jump in and find a group that can be yours. Anyway, now that we move on from the plug, where are we heading in our story?
A name change. And,
there we go.
It's a lot. So I'm excited. This series has been challenging across the board. The hard part for me is when you read some of this, it's easy, even when we talked a little, so to give you a little inside baseball to our sermon prep, we felt this may be 2 sermons. But really the hard part is one of those sermons was pretty hopeless. Here's how you destroy your promise, right? Point your finger at people, try to figure out who's to blame, hurt other people, take matters into your own hands. But there's so much hope also, in the next 3 verses, there's so much hope. So we'll continue to kind of see that where there's a strong challenge. Why would God need to change a name? And yet there's hope at the end of the day that he does have a name. So I'm excited about the rest of this series. It's going to be fun. For sure.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you guys on Sunday at 10 o'clock, either right here in this building or online. Until then, have a great week.
centercity.church/groups.
He said it.
Pew, 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 pew.
Pew.